We're just about a week away from America's 250th birthday, and it's complicated for a lot of people right now, myself included. We kicked off this week what was supposed to be the Great American State Fair, a World's Fair for America on the National Mall. Instead, not every state is participating. The president's Freedom 250 private organization is swallowing the congressionally approved America 250 celebration, and it's siphoning money away, our money, for this thing that's now become about Trump celebrating America 250, not all of us. I mean, this week, when the American State Fair kicked off, it was supposed to kick off with a concert celebrating America. Instead, it was a concert celebrating Trump, and then a bunch of musicians pulled out, so Trump had to turn it into a Trump rally. He said there were 45,000 people there. The actual count is about 1,000, and a lot of people left in the middle. The president is trying to remake monuments around Washington, D.C. He's putting up banners that are 50 to 100 feet tall of his own face next to the founding fathers across the Capitol. And we're in the middle of an active discussion about whether or not Americans who are born on American soil should be considered Americans. That's happening right now at the Supreme Court. It's why my guest today is Karen Anderson, a professor of political rhetoric at Colorado State, who I've had on the show before. She's an expert in authoritarian rhetoric, and we talk about the democratic backsliding that we're seeing now and how we should understand this current moment as Trump puts himself in the middle of celebrating America 250 and what that means for how we should understand where America's at and what we do to go forward. It's a really hard conversation, and I think a lot of people are having right now with these complex emotions that we're feeling about wanting to celebrate how far America has come with how far that we still have to go. It's Friday, June 26th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. Karen, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Grant.
So we're talking about this centering that Trump is doing with the America 250 celebration stuff, which I know that's not the actual name of what he's doing, but I mean that, in the term of like it's America's 250th birthday. And to me, it's this authoritarian psychology that he can't not separate himself from that. Is that how you see this stuff too? I guess we're just going to dive right into the hard stuff here. But like, is that how you see this, or is it just something else? Is it more simple than that?
I mean, I think authoritarianism is at its core a cult of personality. And I think that impulse is really at the core of what motivates Donald Trump as well. It's the reason that when he builds anything, he wants his name on it. When he doesn't build anything in Washington, D.C., he wants his name on it. We had the controversy with the Kennedy Center, the name going up and the name coming down. And I think that, as well as the way that this America 250 celebration has been going, epitomizes the distinction between a leader who sees the country as an extension of himself and a leader who sees their role as serving the country.
I know that you said you've been following this sort of distinction between Freedom 250 and America 250. What's stuck out to you as you've watched that? Because for me, it's made me a little sad, I'll be honest. This idea that Congress set aside all this money for America 250, and now that's getting siphoned off into Freedom 250. And we had, as we were talking, it was last night, the president was supposed to kick off the Great American State Fair, and it became something different. But this whole thing has sort of made me sad, but I know that you're looking at this through a different lens. So how are you looking at this?
I mean, I think I too am saddened by it. I am frustrated by it. I think it goes against the democratic ethos of our country, of our nation's story, of what makes us distinctive as a nation, or at least what we like to think makes us distinctive as a nation. But I think it's also really dangerous. I think when the leader of a party or the leader, the U.S. president can substitute their own agenda for traditions, civil rituals that are part of our national fabric, that have been planned before he became president that we would like to continue after he became president. When he hijacks those rituals and makes them primarily about himself and his agenda, that really shifts who we are as a nation, and robs us of these civic rituals that are really necessary to building a democratic community.
I know this is a thing that we think about, we've heard about all the time, while Trump has been in public life and been president twice now, is that these civic rituals, these civic norms that we have aren't as strong as we thought they were, but it feels like that's more on display as we get closer to this 4th of July. Are you feeling that too here? Or is it this just maybe more poignant as we get closer to the 4th of July? I can't quite tell.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
Yeah.
4th of July, what that has always commemorated is the founding of a country whose origin story was unique. Now, we have not yet lived up fully to that origin story, to the ideals in the Declaration of Independence, that all people are created equal, that we all have the right to self-determination, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The idea, and that it applied to the common person, the polity as a whole, that was the unique part of the American story. Our failure to live up to it is something that we've been contending with, throughout our 250 years. But I think what makes Trump's centering of himself more notable at this 250th celebration mark is that it is such a departure from that story. It is such a departure from, we are a republic of citizens, and the president is a citizen among many, is a servant to the people. That has always been part of that. That is part of the national story that George Washington created, with some of the intentional choices that he made. He used his power to set up a republic, to set up a democratic republic. And we've got Trump, who is using his power, his authority, his control over federal funds, his ability to sort of do what he wants in Washington, D.C., to shift the story away from what George Washington and subsequent presidents and the U.S. Congress and U.S. American voters have constructed over these past 2 centuries.
Do you think that's waning right now as he gets weaker, sort of day by day towards the end of his term, but certainly as we get closer to the midterms here, his party is likely going to lose at least one chamber of the legislative branch. And it feels like he is sort of lashing out and therefore grabbing more and maybe hanging on tighter to some of these more authoritarian impulses that he has. Do you think that we're going to see more of this, or am I just reading too far into that?
I think that he is going to take as much as he can and do as much as our Congress will let him. And so how that chains out, frankly, is determined by the majority, by whoever controls Congress. So right now, it's in the hands of the Republican Party. I have grown tired of limiting this discussion just to the president, or just to the president and his cabinet, because Donald Trump has already betrayed and broken so many laws, so many constitutional directives, around emoluments, around, other things like that, that if the Republican majority in Congress wanted to stop him, they could. So what that tells me is this isn't limited just to the president. It is expanding to the president's party, to the Republican Party. And I think the real question is, what happens when Donald Trump no longer has control over the resources that he now controls? How will the Republican Party react, respond?
What do you think happens then? Well, I mean, what do you think happens then? Because I don't actually know.
I think it depends on when it happens. If the Democrats were somehow to obtain a full congressional majority at the midterms, take the Senate and the House, which is unlikely. If that were to happen, I think we would have kind of a stalemate until the 2028 election. So if we're talking about, all right, the party changes hands, we would have to see, all right, who do they put up as their representative, as their candidate in 2028? Is it somebody who wants to keep driving this train in the direction that Trump has pointed it, say a J.D. Vance, or do they look for an alternative? Do they look for something else? One thing that I think is discouraging, though, is that many of the people who were considered moderate Republicans in Trump's first term have been driven out of the party. So I'm not
Hmm.
really sure in terms of big party representatives if they have someone that they can turn to that would change course on some of these issues.
There's a thing too that I think about frequently, in that Donald Trump, the man, has this sort of reality warping quality to him, and that's I think a blend of his cocktail of psychology or whatever, but also it's the kind of power he wields has this sort of ability to warp the way that people behave around him. I'm specifically thinking of Marco Rubio, but I think you could throw quite a few people into that list. JD Vance obviously among them as well. Do you think that that has then shaped the future of the Republican Party for good, whether Trump is there or not, that they're just going to be this party that is so far down this path of authoritarianism that that's how they're going to operate then? There's kind of no way to pull out of that, whether Trump is involved or not?
Well, the thing that I think is really dangerous about what Trump has done to the Republican Party, it's not even, I mean, the authoritarianism is very dangerous. Let's be
Yeah.
clear about that. It's extremely dangerous, and we're at a very tenuous time. But I don't even think that that was the most dangerous thing that he did. I think the most dangerous thing that he did was to demonstrate to people in any party how weak many of our political norms were. And so
Mm.
it's like you can be caught in a lie and still remain popular and powerful in your party. You can, um, have questionable business engagements that get discovered and still remain in power in your party. The list goes on and on. And so what I'm concerned about is that future politicians will learn the lesson that, okay, maybe they don't even want to use their power for authoritarian purposes explicitly, but maybe they've decided, you know what, I can just put fake stories out into the social media world. I can say whatever I want. I don't need to be held responsible for the things that I say. Even if the media finds me out and reports on my lie, regular people aren't going to care or aren't even going
Mm.
to hear about it because of our new media environment. So I'm really concerned about what this does to our political dialogue writ large because of the shattering of so many of those norms. Now when people in younger generations find out what the Watergate scandal really was, like what it entailed, oftentimes they're like, that's all, because
Yeah. Yeah.
we've had literally 50 scandals in the last 10 years that are magnitudes bigger than what happened in Watergate. And the only
Yes.
reason that Watergate was as big of a deal as it was is because members of Richard Nixon's own party censured him. Members of Richard Nixon's own party said, this went too far. This,
Hmm.
is a violation of our norms. You've got to step down or we're going to impeach you. That was a self-policing of one of our own political parties police themselves. And I think what we found out is that a lot of our democratic system is built on politicians and political parties policing themselves. My hope is that even if political parties prove not to be up to the task, we have seen some encouraging signs with citizens themselves responding, whether it's being very active in whether or not they want a data center in their neighborhood, to being on the streets of Minneapolis and saying, we don't like to see militarized forces walking up and down our streets, and we're gonna
Right.
we're gonna go in the streets and resist. What I think that we need citizens to do is stand up for or take responsibility for policing the standards that we want to hold our politicians to. So if somebody lies to you, don't vote for them. Send the message that we're not going to settle for that. That's a function our political parties used to provide, and
Yeah.
at least one of them is not providing that function anymore.
With something like demanding impeachment, let's say Democrats do win the House, and they don't win the Senate, there's arguments on both sides of this, that running impeachment in the House and not necessarily letting them get to a trial, obviously in the Senate, then would just gum up the works, or that it would be a powerful statement against corruption, against for bolstering the norms that we've had about the presidency and upholding that part of the Constitution. Is that important here still, or does that need to fall by the wayside because this thing is too big?
I mean, from an academic standpoint, it's hard for me to say what the best political strategy is. I think the virtue of any sort of hearings in the House, they will be perceived as partisan if Democrats are the only ones that participate in them. So that's the first question. Now, if they could get some bipartisan participation in impeachment hearings, that would obviously be a step in the right direction. But but even if it is only Democrats, and even if it is perceived as primarily motivated by partisanship, simply getting some facts into the record, whatever the grounds of impeachment would be, probably they would, it seems most likely they would be corruption charges, of the case that, just the extent to which the Trump family has enriched their own personal finances during just this last year is well documented. It's pretty staggering. And I think that congressional hearings allow you to get some of those details in the public record and have people talking about them again. I think there could be some utility to that. But it's tough because what tends to happen with congressional hearings is members of Congress use them to generate moments of content that they can use in their own social media. And I think regular voters can really spot that pretty easily. So if hearings were held, they would have to be held in a way that didn't look self-serving to the party that was in control of the process. But at this point, I do think it's important to simply say, like, one of our major political parties is objecting to the way that this president is conducting himself in office. I mean, that should be the minimum that our parties are able to say at this point.
And it doesn't seem like that's happening. I was going to say, like, what you were describing sort of seems in line with that idea of like new media that you were talking about, and that like really this is just for getting at a certain kind of message that might warp how we understand these things. You know how every social media platform is basically engineered to make you angry and keep you scrolling? That's not an accident. Outrage performs better than nuance, so the algorithm feeds you outrage. I see it every day as someone making news content for a living. The loudest, most biased takes get the reach. The careful, fact-driven stuff like I do my best to bring you here gets buried. That's why I joined Say So. It's a brand new news app just launched, built by a group of former journalists and engineers who asked, what if we build news from scratch for people who actually want to be informed instead of people who just want to keep scrolling? No algorithm optimizing for outrage, no AI slop, just vetted creators delivering fact-driven coverage, curated so you can know what's going on in 5 minutes and then get on with your day. If you're the kind of person who is intentional about your sleep, your workouts, your work, what you eat, but your news diet is just whatever your feed throws at you, this is for you. The same energy finally applied to how you stay informed. I'm one of the first creators on Say So, and my favorite feature is that I can link my sources right in the video. That way, you know how I'm telling you the truth. And if you sign up now, you'll be one of the first users to join. You can download Say So. The link is in the show notes and the description. Go check it out and be as smart as you know you are. All right, let's get back to the show. I also, in thinking about this stuff too, we're talking about legacy, and we're talking about legacy of the presidency here. I mean, we talked about Nixon earlier, and right now there is this movement that's happening. I don't know if you've seen this or not. People online are calling it Nixon maxing because everything has to be called that now. But like but it is an attempt to rehab the legacy of Richard Nixon, and it is troubling because we all know what Richard Nixon was. But when you talk to a lot of younger Americans, they kind of don't have that context anymore. And like you said, it seems so small. And so in terms of legacy here, we are, I think the president just announced yesterday or 2 days ago, maybe from what we're talking, that there was a brand new rose garden or of heroes that they're going to
Yes.
build now in DC,
Yes.
that we fill with statues, that I know is already being sued.
Hmm.
But it's that, it's the arch that is now also going to sport his fist on top, his like fight fist from Pennsylvania. They're talking about, which will be very odd, I think, looking just in general as a design concept. I'm not a designer, but weird. But then you've got the reflecting pool. You've got all the changes he's making to the White House, the ballroom, obviously. What is this obsession among authoritarians and dictators to do this stuff? It's in all of this, no matter where you go around the world. So what is this?
Right. So part of it is that authoritarian cult of personality.
Yeah.
In some ways, Trump is shaping legacy in ways that are different from how his the rest of his party and kind of his policy agenda is shaping legacy. And so let me say there's sort of two things going on. We've got what Trump is interested in. Um, he builds stuff. That's how he ostensibly made a name for himself. And so he's interested in, yes, building structures, putting his name on it, putting his image on it. And that
Yeah.
says a lot because it does mirror, I mean, it says that I think he yearns to be treated as authoritarian leaders have been treated in other cultures. Dictators
Hmm.
and monarchs are the ones that put themselves and their faces on everything. That is not typically how we've handled it in a democracy. But secondly, I think that Trump's legacy is also being shaped in much more damaging ways by policy decisions that are being made, and specifically by trying to capture the media, whether it's influencing changes at 60 Minutes and the Washington Post, that have been, sort of seem to have been done at the behest of, or at least trying not to fall on the wrong side of this administration. And secondly, what is being done by Republican state legislatures across the country and also by Trump's Department of Education to
Mm.
secondary and higher education. Just a real capturing of the narrative, putting really significant limits on what college professors can and cannot do in their classrooms, suspending faculty governance, taking authority over tenure decisions, getting rid of tenure. All of these things are a very dangerous attempt to control what people learn and what people know. And that is another way to control your legacy. If you cannot control it by doing things that people like and want and vote for, then the other way you control it is by being in charge of knowledge production. And
Yeah.
so marrying this sort of obsession with taking over Washington, D.C.'s physical spaces with these policy decisions to take over the free press and universities and university research and university teaching. That is really, really chilling, and not something that I thought I would ever see in the United States of America. I grew up in the Cold War, and we used to say, well, the Soviet Union, they controlled the narrative, and that was one of the things that distinguished us from them. So when our government starts to make those moves, it's really, really chilling.
Yeah, it is this interesting combination of both the image, controlling that he has
Mhm.
for DC, and he wants to expand that, I think, to some parts of New York as well because he's a child of New York.
Mhm.
But then also it's the image and the noise, right? It's the image and the knowledge that you just talked about that I think is interesting, and that for me. The image of this stuff that can be undone, right? You can take his name off the Kennedy Center. They can change the statues in the garden. They can, tear up the rose garden and put grass back down. But it's harder to undo the policy stuff that he's doing. And I think it's harder to see that stuff for a lot of people. I mean, just this week at the Department of Ed, they moved uh, students with disabilities and how the government interacts with those programs under HHS
Mhm.
out of DOE entirely, which will radically alter how we treat kids with disabilities in our schools. And that'll take a long time to undo. Uh, i- is this just how these kinds of governments operate under these leaders, and that's part of how they think?
I mean, that's why we have the term democratic backsliding, Because it doesn't happen all at once. And in the 21st century, it tends not to happen via military takeover. So the way that
Right.
authoritarianism happens now in many places is via the takeover of the institutions, and either slowly or very quickly reshaping these institutions in ways that's very hard to recover from. I don't know. I don't think very many people understand how dramatically the Trump administration is changing higher education. Higher
Yeah.
education has been the gem. It was, in my opinion, the best American invention in the 19th century that made us the most prosperous, technologically advanced country in the 20th century, and the envy of the world. It helped us attract talent from everywhere, and in many cases keep them. That has been destroyed in the last year. And the extent to, and if it continues to be further eroded, further destroyed, it's going to have impact, every college town, which, at
Mhm.
most mid-sized and small towns that have any sort of a robust cultural or educational or economic boom,
Yeah.
there's a university or a college at the center of that. And I just
Yeah.
don't think that people understand the extent to which this party is purposefully trying to close universities' doors.
The ripple effects of that, I think, are going to take longer than we expect to feel. How long do you think it'll take to reach the people that will be like, oh no, now this is a real problem? Because it'll hit those towns and those cities first. I'm thinking of, my college town, Madison, Wisconsin, which has a capital in it, but is for all intents and purposes a college town.
Mm-hmm.
Colorado Springs is like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are Norman, Oklahoma is like that. There are so many that are like that are like that. Ann Arbor is like that
Mm-hmm.
here in Michigan. So I'm curious what you think is the timeline for that before the bottom falls out.
That's a great question. I think the first towns that are going to feel it, so I will just use Colorado as an example.
Hmm.
We've got two big Research One public universities, University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado State University in Fort Collins, but we have a
Hmm.
lot of smaller towns that are sustained by colleges as well. Greeley, Colorado has the University of Northern Colorado. Pueblo, Colorado has CSU Pueblo. Uh, those satellite campuses, the places where you have not the Research One institution in the system, but these smaller systems, those are probably the campuses that are going to go first. They're first going to lose majors, which will cause faculty to leave. They will lose
Hmm.
infrastructure offices, which will cost the cutback on a lot of jobs. And eventually, within 10 years, if we kept on this trajectory, I think those colleges would close. Now, I can't imagine a Greeley, Colorado without the University of Northern Colorado. There's not a lot else to sustain a town like that. You're also going to have
Right.
smaller towns with liberal arts colleges that are going to be hit very hard by, denying tuition funding to colleges that don't pledge fealty to whatever Trump wants. But the other thing that I think you're going to see, so if you look right now, there are colleges primarily in red states, Research One universities, that have signed on to Trump's pact or at least have negotiated and sort of done what he wants them to do. Federal money is flowing towards those universities. Then there are
Hmm.
universities in states like my own, where we are not going along and where we are suing, our state attorney general is suing the president. And our federal dollars are being clawed back, and not just from education, but Trump is loath to send other kinds of federal dollars, like even disaster relief funds to
Right.
states like Colorado. Well, when the state budget is constricted, then that takes even more money away from universities. So what I think we're going to have are red state universities that are over-resourced but have no academic freedom and only teach the party line, with blue state universities that are really, really struggling, or students have to pay much, much higher tuition to access those resources. Now, it would take a very long time to make a University of Colorado or a Colorado State University disappear, shut down, right? That
Right.
would take decades, I'm sure. But it's only taken a year to hollow out a lot of these places. CSU had a round of layoffs in our last budget exercise. And that was the first time we had mass layoffs since I've been a faculty member, and I've been here for 26 years. So
Oh,
it's gonna but I actually think that the way that people who don't work at a college are going to experience it first is really, really high tuition. It's going
yeah.
to be College is going to go from something that that was broadly accessible back to something that people only at the top end of the economic spectrum can access. And that's going to be really devastating to our economy as well.
Mhm. It's interesting that, we're talking about it didn't take any time at all to break something that we thought was so strong and was so pivotal
Mhm.
to the success of the last, arguably 250 years of America,
Mhm.
right? If we're talking about this anniversary coming up, but certainly the last 150 years of the American experiment, that there were so many of these things that it didn't take very long to break them.
Mhm.
And I have been struggling with the idea that were these things so fragile that we were all just sort of unaware, or or is it that they were stronger than we thought, and it was just this administration has been so aggressive that nothing could have stopped it.
Well, so one thing that I think we need to bear in mind is that, again, I'm not a lawyer, but
Yeah.
Trump has made a lot of policy decisions. This administration has made a lot of policy decisions that later the courts have said that is illegal. And I think
Hmm.
it's important for us to say that, yes, these institutions have been crumbling, maybe because they weren't as strong as we thought they were, but also because the Republican Party is not playing by the rules anymore. At least the Trump administration isn't, according to our courts, not according to me, but
Yeah.
according to what the courts have said. So part of it is that, all right, what, and you would think that if somebody is losing court decision after court decision after court decision, normally a normal political situation would be the politician would have to change their activities. They would have to operate differently. Either their
Yeah.
party would say, "Hey, we keep losing to these lawsuits. We're going to toss you out of office," or they themselves would be like, "Oh, my party's going to lose the congressional majority in the midterms because people don't like what I'm doing." That
Hmm.
is not happening, and that is one of the reasons why our institutions seem to be crumbling faster than we would have thought that was possible. But I also want to say something that it isn't it hasn't just been happening for the last year or even the last 10 years. So we'll take higher education for example. There has been a coordinated attack on higher education, on how we do our job, and what the value of a higher education is. The Republican Party has been calling that into question since at least the
It,
1990s. Dinesh D'Souza, who we all sort of know as a famous conservative influencer now, I think it was his first book, but he wrote a book when I was in college called A Liberal Education. And
mhm.
that was the first sort of dust up around so-called political correctness on campus. This has been a message that it has waxed and waned in popularity since the 1990s, but it's been a steady drumbeat. Now, I think that it hadn't been the dominant discourse because people's own experiences of college, when they and their children and their friends and their neighbors went, didn't really line up with what the attack said. It's like, no, actually, employers really do want employees who have college educations. They actually do come with
Right.
a skill set that is valuable. So the market decided that that message wasn't legitimate, and a lot of people in their own lives decided that that message isn't legitimate. What Trump is trying to do now is make that message legitimate by breaking something that wasn't broken before, right? It's one of these things. It's like, okay, we're gonna massively underfund Medicaid, and then we're gonna say, well, Medicaid doesn't work very well. It's like, well,
Right.
it would work well if we designed it in a way that was well supported, and public policy works well when it's well designed.
Right.
But I think because the Republican Party broadly since Reagan has had this idea that, in Reagan's words, government isn't the solution, government is the problem.
Right.
They have been for decades trying to make these institutions work less effectively. So this isn't something that started with Donald Trump, and it's probably not something that's going to end when he's gone. And so it's really up to voters to say, what do we think the role of government is? Do we think that a government that works effectively is of use to us? If so, we should probably elect people that think that it's a good idea to try to have good public policy instead of just get rid of things because we don't want to pay for them through tax money.
My last question here is, how do we hold that line as voters? I think in this moment, a lot of people feel a little hopeless. They're heading towards, this massive celebration. And it feels like Trump is just putting himself in the middle of this thing. And we're being reminded that we're in this moment in American history. And it's not often so many of us are, looking at a present moment and realizing that we're in the middle of a historic moment. So how do people address this right now? How do we start doing the stuff that you were just talking about?
I mean, one thing that I hope that our 250th celebration does is encourage us to look at our founding and remember that in 1776, the odds were against regular people. The odds were against people who were colonists of England, right? They were the great world power. We were just a ragtag, bunch of citizens who wanted self-governance. All of the rules said that we shouldn't have succeeded. And so I think that it comes down to the fundamental lesson of our founding that we are celebrating 250 years of is that citizens working together can accomplish great things. And so building community, building authentic community with one another in our own physical communities, and also cultivating online community spaces that help us work together for the common good, for the interest of, the most marginalized, for that is, I think, what we need to focus on. And I hope that our remembering our founding would encourage us that it's not hopeless yet, that there's a lot that regular citizens can accomplish when they work together.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for being here again. I really appreciate it.
It was a great conversation, Grant. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank Karen again for coming on the show. You can find a link to all of her fantastic work, including her latest book, in the show notes for this episode. And that is it for today's episode and for the rest of the week. I am off all next week to celebrate the 4th of July. I'm doing a little bit of traveling, so you won't hear from me next week. So I hope everybody has a fantastic 4th of July, no matter how you were thinking about it or feeling about it or celebrating it right now or not celebrating it right now. I hope you have a great week while I'm off. In the meantime, make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe if you're a watcher on YouTube. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where paid subscribers can get access to the Things You Forgot from Civics Class newsletter and the brand new article out this week. And as always, share the show on social media. I am at Grant Hermes on Twitter, Blue Sky, and the Say So News app, and Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next time.